So this story begins at Korea's largest women's prison. We can see outside the prison, a preacher with some people was standing. Actually, he was waiting for someone. A little later, when the prison gate was opened, then a woman comes out from inside the prison, and they all welcome her warmly. Actually, we learn that this woman's name is Lee, and she's not a leader or a big celebrity. Actually, she is a killer. She has spent the past 13 years of prison life. That too just for killing a small child, who was only 5 years old. Actually, this incident happened when Lee was only 19 years old. That's why throughout the country, there was an uproar about this. Everyone started discussing this matter. Actually, this was Korea's first case where people were more interested in the killer than the victim. Because the killer was just a very beautiful 19-year-old girl. That's why no one could even believe that this girl could commit murder. However, since Lee herself admitted all the guilt, that's why the court had to rule against her too. Because when the accused herself says she committed the murder, then the police have nothing much to investigate anymore. Actually, since Lee had become the talk of the town, that's why everyone would talk about her. And she became like a celebrity. That's why everyone started dressing like her. Even a director wanted to make a movie about her life. However, it's not necessary that someone's life as we see it, their real lifestyle or life is the same. Where there was commotion and uproar all around, everyone was talking about her. There Lee became completely silent. She didn't want to say anything in her defense, even since she herself confessed to the crime. That's why her punishment was necessary. That's why the court sent her to prison. And she spent a full 13 years in prison. However, even then some people believed Lee didn't do this. She was probably completely innocent. And even now some people believe this. Among them was a Christian preacher named Kim. That's why Kim went to prison to meet Lee. And told her to pray. Because prayer is the only way through which we can walk on God's path. And he was telling her that there's an angel living inside you. Although Lee didn't believe all these things at all. But still she started praying as he said. And like this, while praying, changes started happening within her. She slowly started improving herself in every aspect. She started staying happy every day. Started helping the elderly in prison. She cut cakes on her cellmates' birthdays. Even she started teaching some girls in the prison. And after doing all these things, Lee also slowly started feeling that maybe there really is an angel hidden inside her. And for all these actions, every year she was given the Best Prisoner Award in prison. And that's why she used to be very happy. And we can see with Kim's help, Lee slowly completely transformed herself. Now Lee also feels that maybe she was born to help people. And while doing these things, time started passing by. And like this, when 13 years passed, Lee herself couldn't understand that after serving her full 13-year sentence, she was going to be free today. We can see Priest Kim with some people was standing outside the prison to welcome Lee. He had tofu in his hand. Actually, he came to welcome her with that tofu. This is because of their tradition that if someone after doing something bad, eats tofu and reforms themselves, then this thing works like a promise. She promises this thing that from now on she will keep herself on the right path for the rest of her life, and the actions for which she was punished, she will never do those things again. However, we can see Lee, instead of eating the tofu, takes the tofu from the priest's hand and drops it down, through which we can clearly understand that actually Lee's attitude hasn't changed one bit. For these entire 13 years, Lee was just acting so that she could reduce her punishment. Now she's come out and returned to her true form. After this, Lee goes to meet her old friend Yang. Actually, Yang was also in prison with Lee at one time. But she got released from prison earlier. Actually, from the beginning, Yang considered Lee her leader. Because when she went to prison, she heard that there was a girl named Lee in prison, whose facial structure was somewhat like an angel, and a divine light emanated from her face. That's why she was impressed by her. And in prison, Lee taught Yang how to pray. After this, when they both ate and went to sleep, Lee goes into a dream. Actually, this dream has been following her for the past 13 years. She would see this dream almost every night. We can see a scene from the dream, where we can see Lee dragging a man over ice. Actually, although this man's face was human, his entire body was that of a dog. After Lee drags him to a proper place, she first looks into his eyes. Then after waiting a few seconds, she shoots and kills him. And when she kills him, we can see a peaceful expression on her face. Seeing this, we can clearly understand that maybe she has waited so many years just for this peace. And today when she got that peace, she was very happy. That's why we can also see a smile on her face. And the expression of joy on her face in the dream also appeared on her face in reality. After seeing this, we can also clearly understand that she was very satisfied doing this. Something she may have waited many years to do. The next morning, Lee goes to meet the parents of that little child whom she once murdered. Actually, after seeing her here, that child's parents become very scared. But actually, she came here not for revenge, but to ask for forgiveness. However, her way of asking for forgiveness was a bit different. Actually, she first cuts off one of her fingers with a knife. And she keeps cutting that finger until the child's parents forgive her. And after seeing all this, the child's parents get so scared that they quickly call an ambulance and send her to the hospital. Here Lee receives treatment for many days, thanks to which Lee's finger somehow gets saved. However, paying for the treatment here costs her all the money she had saved in her life. That's why now she has no money left. Now to make ends meet and save some money, she has to take a new job at a bakery. The next day, Lee goes to meet another old prison friend, Woo So-young, who once went to jail for stealing. However, she would sometimes faint in prison. And when they tried to find the cause, they learned that her kidney had failed. That's why she would faint. And then Lee was that friend who gave her a kidney and saved her life. That's why to Woo So-young, Lee was no less than God. She always respected her. And when they come here and talk, we can see they were talking about that plan. The plan that she had discussed with her other friend Young a few days ago. Here in conversation, that Woo So-young and her boyfriend show a book. When the pages of this book are torn and joined together, we can see this actually becomes a blueprint for a high-tech weapon. And this weapon book was given to her by an elderly woman in prison, who once worked for Korea's intelligence agency. Actually, since Lee had taken very good care of the old woman, she gave her this book and said that if you ever feel you need to take revenge for the injustice done to you, then this book can help you. She tells Woo So-young and her boyfriend to quickly make this gun using the gun's blueprint. And she herself goes to meet another prison mate, Soo-hee. Actually, a bad woman in prison would always torture Soo-hee. And since Soo-hee's nature was to endure everything, she was also silently enduring everything. But one day, suddenly Lee makes a plan. And in the bathroom, she makes the bathroom floor slippery with soap. So that when that woman goes to the bathroom, she falls hard on the ground so that she dies there. And like this, Lee takes Soo-hee's revenge and frees her from there for life. That's why Soo-hee was always grateful to her, and she was ready to help her in any way. Actually, Soo-hee was a sculptor by profession, meaning she made sculptures for a living. That's why Lee gives her a sculpture sketch and says, "I want the exact same sculpture, as fast as possible." And with her too, she discusses that same plan, from which we can understand that Soo-hee was also a part of this plan. Actually, she also knew very well that Lee wanted to take revenge on someone. But from whom she wants to take revenge hasn't been made clear to us yet. But the way she's meeting with everyone one by one. This makes us clearly understand that this planning wasn't done in just a day or two. Rather, she spent those long 13 years, perhaps sitting in prison, making this plan. And now she's slowly executing it. Then one day, suddenly, a man named Detective Choi shows up at the bakery where Lee works. And then we learn that Detective Choi is the guy who investigated Lee's case 13 years ago. Actually, even then, after the investigation, he felt Lee didn't commit this murder. And even now he feels Lee didn't commit that murder. Then the story goes back 13 years. Here we can see when Detective Choi was questioning Lee, hearing the answers to some questions, he clearly understood that Lee actually didn't commit this murder. Lee actually doesn't know certain information that any murderer would need to know, like when she killed that child, there was a ball near the child. What kind of ball it was, she couldn't even tell that. Even when she killed the child, what color pillow she used to smother and kill him, she couldn't tell that either. But the most interesting thing was, despite not knowing all these things, Lee kept repeatedly confessing to all the blame, and she kept saying she committed this murder. Even when the police took Lee back to the crime scene to recreate the murder scene, Lee was very nervous. She couldn't even do anything properly. But then we can see a man nearby repeatedly giving Lee some kind of signal through gestures, and then Lee finally understood the gesture, and somehow managed to convince the police that she committed this murder. But the question is, who is this man that Lee is repeatedly trying to save, and why? This is the most complex question of this movie. From here, the story comes back to the present. We can see Lee comes to an adoption center. Actually, she came here to inquire about a child. But here, the girl sitting at the reception refused to give her any information about any child directly. She says that without formal procedures, we cannot give you information about any child. But actually Lee needed information about that child by any means necessary. Because that was her own daughter, Jenny. Actually, we learned that Lee got pregnant when she was just 18. But her boyfriend refused to take responsibility for this child. And her parents weren't happy at all after hearing about this child. So Lee couldn't understand what she should do. She went to her teacher, Mr. Beck, and tried to ask for help. Mr. Beck agreed to help her. But in return, Mr. Beck started torturing her both physically and mentally. And we can see Mr. Beck is the man who was standing in the crowd during the police investigation, repeatedly guiding Lee through gestures. And when Lee went to prison for this murder case, her daughter was sent for adoption. And now, since Lee wants to know about her daughter by any means, she finally breaks into the building at night by drilling a hole in the building's wall and enters the building directly. And from here, she searches and finds a file through which she learns that her daughter was adopted by an Australian couple, so now she lives in Australia. And as soon as Lee learns about her daughter, she becomes eager to meet her daughter. But until now, she didn't have enough money to travel all the way to Australia. So she quickly goes to the bakery owner, Mr. Beck, and asks for 3 months' salary in advance. And to reassure him a bit, she gives him a bank account number and starts helping him make cakes. Actually, she was trying to make him understand that she would definitely pay back his money through work. Then Lee comes out to meet her co-worker Gunshik and starts talking with him. Actually, their relationship had become very good. They even started liking each other. Although Lee had told him everything about herself. She told him she had been in prison once. She even told him that the murder she went to prison for, she actually didn't commit. Rather, that child was murdered by that teacher named Mr. Beck. Although Lee was with him when that child was kidnapped. But she wasn't with him when he was killed. Actually, although after Mr. Beck kidnapped the child, the ransom money he demanded from the child's parents had paid it. But still, Mr. Beck killed that child. Although after seeing such a terrible side of Mr. Beck, Lee couldn't believe at all that she could kill any human being. But when that child hadn't returned home for many days, his sister went and filed a complaint with the police. So when the police searched the school, they learned from there that a girl had come to the school to pick him up, and that girl was none other than this girl named Lee. So from then on, the police started chasing her, and they started considering her the murderer. But Lee actually knew nothing about all these things. She was living a very beautiful life with her daughter and leading a very ordinary life. But one day when she suddenly came back home from the market, she saw that her daughter had somehow disappeared. She searched for a long time but couldn't find her daughter anywhere. But then she received a call from Mr. Beck. And Mr. Beck threatened her, saying that if you want to see your daughter alive, then take all the blame for that child's murder on yourself. Now what else could a mother do? To save her own daughter, she took all the blame for another child's murder on herself. Which is why she had to stay in prison for a full 13 years. And she's been away from her daughter for 13 years. Then Lee comes to Australia to meet her daughter. Coming here, she learns that her daughter Jenny has been adopted by a very good family who love her very much. They always try to protect her. Although Lee's daughter Jenny didn't really like this family very much. But since they had spent a long time together, she definitely had some attachment to them. And so when she sees her mother, she becomes crazy about going to Korea with her mother, and she tries to convince her mother by any means. Although Lee was trying to explain to her that if you come with me, your life won't be as happy, you might have to face various difficulties. But Jenny wasn't listening to anything, so finally, almost forced, she takes her daughter away from that adopted family, and Lee comes straight to Seoul with her daughter. But even after getting her daughter back, Lee couldn't forget her obsession with revenge. So she starts working according to her plan. She first comes to meet her friend Yu-sun, who according to her blueprint had already prepared a gun for her. This gun was working perfectly. But this gun had one problem. It was very short range. And then when she goes to meet Soo-hee, she had also made that statue for her. So the first part of her planning was complete. Now the second part of her planning would begin. Then she comes to meet a girl named Park. Actually, Lee knew this girl named Park from prison too. Because they were both in prison together. And she was also tortured by a fat woman, just like Soo-hee was tortured by another fat woman. So when Lee could see all these things, once when that woman became sick, Lee started taking care of that woman and started bringing her food. But Lee would mix a little poison into the food, so that after eating, that fat woman would eventually die. And like this, everyone's revenge was complete. And after seeing Lee's such terrible side, people around started calling her witch too. But for some people, she was no less than God, especially for Soo-hee and Park. And now this Park has also become Mr. Beck's wife. So when Lee comes and meets her, telling her the whole plan, Park also agrees to join her planning. Actually, on one hand, Mr. Beck was brutally torturing Park. He would torture her both physically and mentally. On the other hand, she could help complete Lee's revenge. So for her, it was like killing two birds with one stone. So she tells Lee that she had been waiting God knows how long to join this planning. Now both of them decide to complete their planning tonight. But then Lee notices someone is following her. Actually, this person was none other than Priest Kim, who thought that by teaching Lee to pray in prison, he had completely changed her life. He had brought her to the path of religion. But actually Lee did all these things to reduce her sentence. And for the entire 13 years in prison, she was acting. So when Priest Kim learns that Lee had actually deceived him, all his 13 years of hard work had gone to waste, he becomes very angry. So he goes and joins Mr. Beck. And Mr. Beck also gives him the job of following Lee. And while he was following her, he clicked a photo of her with Park. So when he brings that photo and gives it to Mr. Beck, after seeing it, Mr. Beck also becomes very shocked. Because he couldn't believe that his wife had the best friendship with his biggest enemy. After that, Mr. Beck hires 2 killers to kill Park and Lee. And he pays them money to send them to kill Lee. And he calls Park and brings him to his house. However, we can see that by the time those killers went to kill Lee, Lee had already finished both of them there with the help of that gun. On the other hand, Mr. Beck brings Park to his house and ties him to a chair. And he beats him up really badly. Actually, since he had joined forces with his biggest enemy, that's why he was beating him up. Then he starts having dinner. And he was thinking he would finish Park right after finishing his dinner. Because Park was there tied up in front of him. But before finishing dinner, he passes out. Actually, the problem was that the dinner he was eating was prepared by Park himself. And he had already guessed all these things beforehand. That's why he had mixed poison in it. He did this right after meeting with Lee. Actually, Mr. Beck thought everything was going according to his planning. But actually this was completely wrong. Everything was going according to Lee's planning. Because Lee had already understood that Mr. Kim was following her from a distance. And she knew very well what he would do next. After that, Lee captures Mr. Beck and brings him to an old school where no people come and go. She ties him to a chair and holds him at gunpoint. Here, Lee had also brought her daughter Jenny. She brought her because she wanted to tell her daughter all these things, that actually the murder for which she stayed away from her for 13 years, she didn't actually commit. That murder was committed by this man named Beck. That's why she points the gun at Beck's head and tells him that now you will confess all your crimes in front of my daughter. And you will explain to my daughter that actually the murder for which I spent 13 years in prison, I didn't commit that murder. Rather, you committed that murder. Actually, although Lee had tried to tell her daughter everything long ago, since her daughter had grown up in Australia since childhood, her language had changed quite a bit. She basically can't understand Korean now. That's why Lee couldn't explain things to her daughter in any way. That's why Lee tried to get this done through Mr. Beck's mouth, so that Mr. Beck would confess everything in front of her daughter himself. And Mr. Beck also confesses all his crimes in front of Lee's daughter to save his own life, and tells all the details of everything. And after hearing all these things, Lee's daughter also becomes very upset, so she starts crying a lot. She goes and hugs her mother tightly. After that, Lee finds a mobile phone from Mr. Beck's pocket, which mobile phone was attached to a keychain. In this keychain, she finds that red ball which was in the hands of that child for whose murder Lee went to prison for 13 years. That ball which the police haven't been able to discover till now. But when Lee sees many other toys attached in this keychain, it doesn't take Lee long to understand that these toys might belong to other children whom Mr. Beck has killed. That's why she becomes extremely angry and beats up Mr. Beck really badly, shooting him twice in both legs. Then she calls Detective Choi using his mobile phone and tells him to come quickly. And here Lee also learns from Choi that while searching in the forest, they have found the bodies of 3 other children. And when Lee shows Mr. Beck's mobile keychain in front of him, Choi clearly understands that actually Mr. Beck also murdered those 3 children. And when a raid is conducted in Beck's house for the rest of the investigation, after searching here, they find several cassettes in which there were videos of all those children whom Mr. Beck murdered. Actually, Beck used to kill these children in a very horrible way and used to record videos of everything. That's why Lee calls all these children's parents to a school and shows them these brutal videos of their children. When they see such terrible fate of their children, they become like crazy people. Then Beck is also shown in front of them. And then we learn that actually Beck is a school teacher who takes jobs at new schools every month and works there for about a month, kidnaps any child from there, brutally murders them, and escapes from there. Although the child might not be taken from his class, the child would be taken from that school. And later he would call that child's parents and demand money from them. Even though he would get the money, he would still kill those children in such a horrible way. That's why till now no one has even been able to suspect him, let alone the police catching him. Anyway, now that all the parents know who actually killed their children, Lee leaves everything up to them. She says that if you want, you can kill Mr. Beck right here, or you can hand him over to Detective Choi and let the law take its course. Detective Choi would later handle this case in court in his own way. But before doing this, Lee decides to take a vote among them. Actually, whichever side gets more votes, exactly that will be done with Mr. Beck. And when the vote is taken, we can see all the parents wanted to punish their children's killer with their own hands. And Detective Choi also voted for the parents' side after seeing all these things. And then the real game begins. We can see she gives all the parents some plastic bags which they are told to tie on their heads. She also gives them something like raincoats, through which they cover their entire body. Actually, she was doing these things so that not even a drop of blood would remain here as evidence by mistake. Since she was in prison for 13 years, she must have learned something from there. She tried to learn this method of killing properly. After that, all the parents start attacking Mr. Beck. Some with knives, some with axes, with whatever they had, they tore Mr. Beck's body to pieces. Actually, all the anger they had throughout their lives, they were taking it all out on Mr. Beck. And when Mr. Beck eventually dies like this, they all clean the blood from there, wrap his body in that big plastic bag, take it and come to a forest. And they try to dig a hole and bury the body. But when they dig the hole and throw the body in, they also throw their raincoats into that hole, so that no evidence remains. But while they were doing these things, Lee stops them all. Because everyone's revenge has been taken. But who will take her revenge? Her revenge is not complete yet. Because she spent 13 whole years in prison for him. She has to take revenge for that. So she comes very close to the grave. And after looking at Mr. Beck for a moment, she fires several shots at him with her gun. This way she completes her revenge. And we can see after completing 13 years of revenge, she becomes very happy. She becomes so peaceful that tears of joy start falling from her eyes. Actually, Lee's tears had dried up after enduring torture for 13 years. Today, after taking revenge, tears started falling from her eyes. Anyway, after completing this task, Lee and everyone else take a group photo together, so that later they cannot blame each other. Because they all committed this crime together. They have equal participation here. After that, they all come to the bakery and start celebrating by cutting cake. A few days later, we can see those who had adopted Jenny from Australia come again to take her. Although Lee didn't want to keep her daughter away from her in any way, she also knew very well that she had to spend 13 years in prison for a murder she didn't commit. But now she has committed the murder. Now maybe she might have to go to prison again. And if this really happens, then it won't be possible for her to give her daughter a good future. That's why she makes the decision to send her daughter to Australia with a heavy heart. Because going there might be good for her future, and she won't turn out like her. And at such an interesting point, this entire movie ends here.